The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as Captain Tom Moore adjusted his military tie for the 100th time. His weathered hands, marked by 99 years of life's journey, trembled slightly as he smoothed the fabric against his chest. The green jacket of his Yorkshire Regiment uniform had been pressed to perfection, each metal polished until it gleamed like starlight. "Are you ready, Captain?" asked his daughter, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and nervous excitement. She had been his constant companion through the extraordinary months that had transformed her father from a retired army officer into a national hero. Tom turned from the ornate mirror in the castle's guest quarters, his blue eyes twinkling with the same mischief that had carried him through the Second World War and into the hearts of millions. "My dear, I've been ready for this moment since I was 19 years old and first put on this uniform." The journey to this remarkable day had begun with something as simple as a walk in his garden. During the dark days of the coronavirus pandemic, when Britain was locked down and hope seemed as distant as summer sunshine, Tom had made a decision that would change everything. He would walk 100 lengths of his garden before his 100th birthday, raising money for the National Health Service heroes who were fighting on the front lines of an invisible war. What started as a modest goal of raising £1,000 had snowballed into something beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The British public, starved of good news during those uncertain times, had embraced Captain Tom's mission with unprecedented enthusiasm. Donations poured in from every corner of the United Kingdom and beyond. School children emptied their piggy banks, pensioners sent their weekly savings, and celebrities pledged enormous sums to support the man who had given them all something to believe in. As Tom made his way through the castle's corridors, guided by impeccably dressed royal staff, he reflected on the surreal nature of his situation. Just months ago, he had been living quietly in his home in Bedfordshire, enjoying his retirement and the company of his family. His days were filled with simple pleasures, reading the newspaper cover to cover, tending to his small garden, and sharing stories of his wartime service with anyone willing to listen. The transformation had been gradual at first. His family had suggested the fundraising walk as a way to mark his approaching centenary and contribute something meaningful during the pandemic. Tom had readily agreed, drawing on the same determination that had seen him through the Burma campaign in World War II. He remembered those jungle battles, the oppressive heat, the constant threat of enemy attack, and the unwavering courage of his fellow soldiers. But nothing in his military experience had prepared him for the media storm that erupted around his garden walks. Television crews appeared at his gate, journalists called at all hours, and social media exploded with messages of support from around the world. The hashtag became a rallying cry for a nation desperate for optimism. The walking frame that Tom used for his garden laps had become as famous as any royal scepter. Each determined step was broadcast live on television, with millions of viewers cheering him on from their own homes. Children drew pictures of him, musicians wrote songs about his courage, and prime ministers praised his service to the nation. Tom paused at a window overlooking the castle grounds, where he could see the spot where the knighthood ceremony would take place. The Queen herself had made the unprecedented decision to conduct the ceremony outdoors, a reflection of the extraordinary times and the need for social distancing. A small platform had been erected on the castle's pristine lawn, flanked by the colors of his old regiment and the Union Jack. The irony was not lost on Tom that he was about to be knighted by the same monarch he had served during his military career. When he had enlisted in the Duke of Wellington's regiment in 1940, King George VI had been on the throne, and young Princess Elizabeth was still years away from her coronation. Now, more than 8 decades later, he would kneel before Queen Elizabeth II to receive one of the highest honors in the land. His mind wandered to his late wife, who had passed away in 2006. How she would have laughed at the thought of her husband becoming a knight of the realm. Had always said that Tom was destined for greatness, but even her boundless faith in him could not have predicted this extraordinary chapter in his life story. The walk to the ceremony location seemed to take forever, though it was only a few hundred yards through the castle's state apartments. Tom moved slowly but steadily, his walking frame clicking rhythmically against the ancient stone floors. Palace staff lined the corridors, many of them breaking protocol to smile and nod respectfully as he passed. Even within these walls, where extraordinary events were routine, Captain Tom Moore represented something special. His grandson walked alongside him, carrying a small Union Jack flag that had been specially made for the occasion. The young man's eyes were bright with unshed tears as he watched his grandfather prepare to make history. For this was the culmination of months during which his grandfather had become the most famous person in Britain, yet had somehow remained exactly the same kind, humble man who had always been his hero. Followed close behind, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from well-wishers around the world. The Prime Minister had called that morning to offer his congratulations. The Archbishop of Canterbury had sent a personal blessing. Even President had taken time from his busy schedule to record a message of support for the centenarian who had captured America's imagination. As they approached the final turn before the ceremony location, Tom felt a familiar sensation in his chest. It was the same feeling he had experienced before going into battle all those years ago in Burma. Not fear, exactly, but a heightened awareness that he was about to participate in something that would echo through history. The gardens came into view, and Tom could see the modest but elegant setup that awaited him. The Queen's standard fluttered in the gentle breeze, and a small military band was arranged to one side. Despite the pandemic restrictions, a select group of family members and palace officials had been permitted to attend as witnesses to this historic moment. Tom's thoughts turned to all the NHS workers who had inspired his fundraising walk. The doctors and nurses, cleaners and ambulance drivers, administrators and support staff who had risked their lives every day during the pandemic's darkest hours. They were the real heroes, he had always insisted. He was simply an old soldier doing his bit to support them. The irony that he was being honored for raising money was not lost on Tom. In his view, he had simply done what any decent person would do when faced with a crisis. The fact that his simple act of walking in his garden had resonated with so many people said more about the British public's generosity than it did about his own worthiness. As they reached the final doorway that would lead them onto the lawn where history awaited, Tom paused for a moment. The 99-year-old veteran took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders with military precision, and prepared to step into a moment that would define not just his own legacy, but serve as a symbol of hope and resilience for generations to come. The door opened, and Captain Tom Moore stepped forward into the English sunshine, ready to receive the highest honor his sovereign could bestow, carrying with him the hopes and dreams of a nation that had found its hero in the most unlikely of places, a back garden in Bedfordshire where an old soldier had decided to take a walk. The moment Captain Tom Moore stepped onto the perfectly manicured lawn of Windsor Castle, he was struck by the profound silence that seemed to envelope the historic grounds. Despite the presence of photographers, palace officials, and his own family members, there was a reverent hush that spoke to the extraordinary nature of what was about to unfold. Queen Elizabeth II stood waiting near the ceremonial platform, her presence both commanding and gracious. At 94, she was only 5 years younger than Tom himself, and there was a shared understanding between them of lives fully lived through decades of service to their country. The monarch wore a bright blue dress with matching hat, her ensemble carefully chosen to provide a striking contrast against the verdant backdrop of the castle grounds. Tom felt his military training take over as he approached the designated spot. His posture straightened, and despite his reliance on the walking frame, his bearing conveyed the dignity of a soldier who had never forgotten his duty to serve. Each step across the lawn was deliberate and measured, carrying the weight of not just his own journey, but the hopes of millions who had followed his story. The Queen's private secretary stepped forward with the ceremonial sword, a blade that had been used in countless knighthood ceremonies over the centuries. The weapon gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, its polished surface reflecting the gravity of the moment. For Tom, seeing that sword brought back memories of his own military service, when such ceremonial weapons had been tools of war rather than symbols of honor. As Tom slowly lowered himself to kneel before his sovereign, he couldn't help but think of all the remarkable twists of fate that had led to this moment. The pandemic that had initially seemed like an insurmountable global catastrophe had somehow created the circumstances for his own extraordinary story to unfold. If not for the lockdown, he might never have conceived his fundraising walk. If not for the public's desperate need for hope, his simple gesture might never have captured the nation's imagination. The Queen raised the sword with practiced ease, her movements precise and ceremonial. "By the power vested in me," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the intimate gathering, "I dub thee Sir Thomas More, Knight Bachelor." The blade touched his right shoulder, then his left, completing a ritual that connected him to centuries of British history and tradition. Sir Thomas More, the title still felt surreal as he carefully rose to his feet with assistance from palace staff. The Queen stepped forward to personally pin the insignia of his knighthood to his uniform jacket, her movements graceful despite her advanced years. As she worked, she spoke quietly to him, her words meant only for his ears. "Your service to this country, both in war and in peace, has been truly exceptional," she said, her voice warm with genuine appreciation. "The way you have lifted the spirits of the nation during these difficult times will not be forgotten." Tom felt a lump form in his throat as he replied, "Your Majesty, I have only done what I felt was right. The real heroes are those NHS workers who risk their lives every day to care for others." The Queen smiled at his characteristic humility. "Sir Thomas, sometimes a single act of kindness by a generous spirit can change the world. That is precisely what you have accomplished." As the formal ceremony concluded, Tom found himself surrounded by his family members, who had watched the proceedings with a mixture of awe and overwhelming pride. Approached first, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her father. "Dad, I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. His grandson was next, still clutching the small Union Jack flag he had carried throughout the ceremony. The young man had grown up hearing stories of his grandfather's wartime service, but seeing him knighted by the Queen seemed to crystallize just how extraordinary his grandfather truly was. The palace photographers captured every moment of the family celebration, knowing that these images would become part of the historical record. Sir Thomas More's knighthood was not just a personal achievement. It was a symbol of hope and resilience that had emerged from one of the darkest periods in recent British history. As the official proceedings wound down, the Queen surprised everyone by lingering to chat informally with Sir Thomas and his family. This was highly unusual for royal protocol, but these were unusual times, and Sir Thomas was an unusual man. The monarch seemed genuinely interested in learning more about his background and his thoughts on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. "Tell me about your fundraising walk," the Queen requested, settling into a comfortable conversation despite the formal setting. "How did you manage to maintain your spirits during those 100 laps of your garden?" Sir Thomas chuckled, his eyes twinkling with the humor that had endeared him to millions. "Your Majesty, I simply remembered that tomorrow would be a good day. It was a phrase that kept me going through the war, and it served me well during the lockdown, too." The Queen nodded appreciatively. "That optimism of yours has been infectious. I've received countless letters from people around the world who have been inspired by your example." The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, covering topics from Sir Thomas's wartime experiences in Burma to his thoughts on modern technology and social media. The Queen was particularly interested in how he had adapted to becoming an internet sensation at nearly 100 years of age. "I must confess, Your Majesty, that I still don't fully understand Twitter or Instagram," Sir Thomas admitted with a laugh. "My family handles most of that for me. I prefer face-to-face conversations like this one." As the afternoon progressed, palace staff began to discreetly signal that the ceremony needed to conclude. The Queen had other appointments, and Sir Thomas himself was beginning to show signs of fatigue from the excitement and standing for an extended period. Before taking his leave, Sir Thomas made one final request. "Your Majesty, would it be possible for me to say a few words to the cameras? I would like to thank all the people who supported my fundraising efforts." The Queen readily agreed, understanding the importance of allowing Sir Thomas to address the nation that had embraced him so wholeheartedly. Palace staff quickly arranged for the official photographers and video crew to capture his remarks. Standing before the cameras with Windsor Castle as his backdrop, Sir Thomas spoke from the heart. "Today has been one of the most extraordinary days of my long life. To be knighted by Her Majesty, the Queen, is an honor beyond anything I could have imagined when I began my little walk in the garden." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "But I want everyone to remember that this honor belongs not just to me, but to every person who donated to support our NHS heroes. You are the ones who made this possible. You are the ones who proved that even in the darkest times, the British people will come together to support those who need it most." The knight's words carried across the castle grounds and would soon echo around the world. Television networks prepared to broadcast his remarks globally. ensuring that his message of gratitude and unity would reach the millions who had followed his journey. As Sir Thomas concluded his impromptu speech, he raised his walking frame slightly in acknowledgement of the cameras, a gesture that would become one of the most memorable images of the entire ceremony. The sight of the newly knighted centenarian, standing proud in his military uniform against the backdrop of Windsor Castle, captured everything about his remarkable story. The formal departure from the castle took nearly as long as the ceremony itself, as palace staff and officials lined up to personally congratulate Sir Thomas on his achievement. Each handshake and word of praise seemed to energize him further, despite his advanced age. As the family car finally pulled away from Windsor Castle, Sir Thomas settled back into his seat with a contented sigh. Through the window, he watched the ancient walls of the castle disappear behind them, knowing that he was leaving as a very different man than the one who had arrived that morning. He was now Sir Thomas More, Knight Bachelor, but more importantly, he was a symbol of hope for a nation that had desperately needed something to believe in during its darkest hour. The journey home from Windsor Castle felt different to Sir Thomas more than any car ride he had ever taken. The weight of his new knighthood sat not on his shoulders, but in his heart, filling him with a profound sense of responsibility that went far beyond personal achievement. As the countryside rolled past the window, he found himself reflecting on the incredible chain of events that had transformed his simple garden walk into a moment of national significance. Sat beside him, occasionally glancing at her father with a mixture of wonder and concern. She had watched him navigate the extraordinary pressures of sudden fame with remarkable grace, but she worried about how the intensity of the day might affect him. At 99, even positive excitement could be overwhelming. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked softly, reaching over to adjust his with the careful attention she had shown him throughout this entire journey. Sir Thomas turned to her with a smile that seemed to illuminate his entire face. "My dear, I feel like I'm floating somewhere between earth and heaven. This morning I woke up as plain old Tom Moore, and now I'm returning home as a knight of the realm. It's almost too extraordinary to believe." The phone in his purse buzzed constantly with calls and messages from journalists, well-wishers, and officials wanting to schedule interviews or appearances. The demand for Sir Thomas's time had been overwhelming even before the knighthood, but now it would reach new heights. Everyone wanted to speak with the man who had become Britain's most beloved hero. Who had been unusually quiet since leaving the castle, finally spoke up from the front seat. "Grandpa, when you were walking in the garden those first few days, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Sir Thomas chuckled, his eyes twinkling with the humor that had sustained him through nearly a century of life. "My boy, if someone had told me that walking up and down the garden would result in a knighthood from the Queen herself, I would have suggested they see a doctor immediately." The family laughed together, the tension of the formal ceremony finally giving way to the comfortable warmth they had always shared. Despite all the attention and accolades, Sir Thomas remained fundamentally unchanged, the same loving father and grandfather who had always put family first. As they approached, they could see that their quiet village had been transformed. News crews lined the streets, and Union Jack bunting hung from every lamp post. Neighbors stood in their doorways, waiting to welcome home their famous resident. The local pub had erected a banner reading, "Welcome home, Sir Tom," and children from the village school held hand-drawn signs celebrating their hero. The police had cordoned off their street to manage the crowds of well-wishers and media representatives who had gathered to witness Sir Thomas's homecoming. As their car turned into the familiar road where he had lived for years in peaceful anonymity, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers that could be heard for blocks around. Sir Thomas was deeply moved by the display of affection from his community. These were the people who had known him long before he became famous, who had watched him tend his garden and had shared casual conversations over the garden fence. Their genuine excitement at his achievement meant more to him than all the global media attention combined. The car pulled into his driveway, and Sir Thomas could see his modest back garden where it all began. The small paved area where he had completed his 100 laps looked impossibly ordinary compared to the grandeur of Windsor Castle, yet it was this humble space that had captured the imagination of the world. Getting out of the car required assistance, as always, but Sir Thomas insisted on acknowledging the crowd gathered outside his gate. Supported by his walking frame, he made his way slowly to where the neighbors and well-wishers waited behind the police barriers. "Thank you all for this wonderful welcome," he called out, his voice carrying despite his advanced age. "This honor belongs to all of us, to everyone who supported the NHS during these difficult times. You have shown the world what British spirit truly means." Mrs. Henderson from next door, who had been his neighbor for over 15 years, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Sir Thomas, we're all so proud of you. You've made our little village famous around the world." Sir Thomas reached through the barrier to take her hand. "My dear friend, I'm still the same Tom who borrows your newspaper when mine doesn't arrive on time. A knighthood doesn't change the important things in life." The crowd laughed appreciatively at his characteristic humility. Children pushed forward to give him drawings they had made during the ceremony, their artwork depicting him as everything from a superhero to a medieval knight in shining armor. Each picture was carefully examined and praised, with Sir Thomas taking genuine interest in every crayon masterpiece. Local television crews captured every moment of the homecoming, but Sir Thomas seemed more interested in the personal connections than the media coverage. He asked about neighbors' families, inquired about local issues, and maintained the same genuine interest in his community that had defined his character long before he became famous. As the afternoon wore on, the formal celebration gradually gave way to more intimate conversations. Close friends and family members were invited inside for tea and cake, continuing a British tradition that felt especially appropriate for such a quintessentially British hero. In the familiar comfort of his own sitting room, surrounded by the photographs and mementos of a life well lived, Sir Thomas began to process the magnitude of what had occurred. The walls displayed pictures from his military service, his wedding day with beloved, and countless family celebrations spanning decades. Now those walls would need space for photographs from Windsor Castle and his meeting with the Queen. His daughter Lucy, who had traveled from London for the ceremony, sat beside him on the sofa where he had given countless television interviews during the height of his fame. "Dad, what do you think Mum would have said about today?" she asked, referring to her mother. Sir Thomas's eyes grew misty as he considered the question. "Your mother always said I was destined for great things, though I suspect even she would have been surprised by today's events. She had such faith in people's capacity for goodness. I think she would have been most proud of how the public responded to our fundraising appeal." The conversation turned to practical matters as the family discussed how to manage the increased attention that would inevitably follow the knighthood. Interview requests were pouring in from around the world, and publishing companies were eager to discuss book deals. There were also ongoing commitments related to his charitable foundation and various NHS support initiatives. "We need to be careful not to overcommit," warned, her protective instincts always focused on her father's. "Dad, you're 99 years old, and while today has been wonderful, we don't want to exhaust you." Sir Thomas nodded appreciatively at her concern, but his eyes still sparkled with enthusiasm. "My dear, I've been given this platform for a reason. As long as I have strength, I want to use it to help others and spread some joy in this troubled world." The family spent the evening planning a more sustainable schedule that would allow Sir Thomas to continue his charitable work while protecting his health. They agreed to limit interviews to the most significant opportunities and to ensure that all commitments aligned with his core mission of supporting healthcare workers and spreading positivity. As night fell over, the crowds gradually dispersed, though a few dedicated well-wishers maintained their vigil outside the garden gate. Sir Thomas stood at his bedroom window, looking down at the small garden where his remarkable journey had begun just months earlier. The paved area looked exactly the same as it had on that first day when he had decided to walk 100 lengths before his 100th birthday. Yet everything had changed. That simple patch of concrete had become the launching point for one of the most inspiring stories of the modern era, proving that extraordinary things could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. Sir Thomas prepared for bed with the same routine he had followed for years, but tonight felt different. Tomorrow would indeed be a good day. The phrase that had become his trademark seemed more prophetic than ever. He was now Sir Thomas More, Knight Bachelor, a title he would carry with honor and humility for whatever time remained to him. As he settled into sleep, Sir Thomas reflected on the remarkable truth that sometimes the simplest acts of service, performed with genuine heart, could touch millions of lives and change the world. His garden walk had ended, but his real journey as a symbol of hope and resilience was just beginning. The weeks following Sir Thomas More's knighthood ceremony brought a new rhythm to life in the small Bedfordshire village of. Every morning, he would rise early, as had been his habit throughout his military career, and look out at the garden where his extraordinary journey had begun. The walking frame that had carried him through those historic 100 laps now stood in the corner of his bedroom, a silent witness to the miracle that had unfolded. The transformation in public recognition was immediate and profound. Letters arrived by the thousands from every corner of the globe, each one carrying personal stories of how Sir Thomas's walk had inspired individual acts of courage and kindness. A retired teacher from Scotland wrote about organizing neighborhood support for elderly residents. A young nurse from Australia shared how his example had motivated her to continue working through the most challenging days of the pandemic. Children from Japan sent origami cranes with wishes for his continued health and happiness. Had enlisted a team of volunteers to help manage the correspondence, setting up a small office in the local community center to handle the overwhelming response. Each letter was read, though Sir Thomas could no longer personally respond to everyone. Still, he insisted on reading selections daily, finding strength and purpose in the human connections that stretched across continents. Each letter represents a life touched, he would tell as they sorted through the daily mail. These people have taken the time to share their hearts with an old soldier. The least I can do is honor that trust by reading their words. The media attention had also evolved from the initial frenzy of his garden walks to a more sustained interest in his perspectives on life, service, and resilience. Major television networks from around the world sought interviews, and Sir Thomas found himself being asked to comment on everything from the pandemic response to the nature of heroism in modern society. During an interview with the BBC, the presenter asked him to reflect on how his definition of heroism had changed over the years. Sir Thomas paused thoughtfully before responding, his voice carrying the weight of nearly a century of experience. During the war, we thought heroes were the soldiers who charged into battle or the pilots who flew dangerous missions, he said, his eyes distant as he remembered those young faces from Burma. But this pandemic has taught me that heroes are also the nurse working a double shift, the teacher finding new ways to reach students, the shop worker ensuring communities have food. Heroes are everywhere, doing ordinary jobs with extraordinary dedication. His words resonated far beyond Britain's shores. The interview was translated into dozens of languages and shared across social media platforms, reaching audiences that had never heard of the small English village where he lived. Universities began studying his phenomenon as an example of how individual action could create global movements for good. The charitable foundation established in his name continued to grow, raising millions of pounds for healthcare workers and related causes. Sir Thomas insisted on being personally involved in decisions about how the funds were distributed, often surprising recipients with personal phone calls to thank them for their service. One such call went to Dr. Sarah Martinez, an emergency room physician in London who had worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic's worst months. When her phone rang on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, she never expected to hear the familiar voice that had become synonymous with hope. "Dr. Martinez, this is Sir Thomas More," he began, his tone warm and genuine. "I wanted to personally thank you for your service and let you know that our foundation is providing a grant to support the mental health program for healthcare workers at your hospital." Dr. Martinez later described the call as one of the most meaningful moments of her career. To receive that recognition from someone who had become a symbol of resilience, it meant everything. He reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. These personal connections became increasingly important to Sir Thomas as he navigated his new role as a public figure. Despite the global attention, he remained most energized by individual stories and personal interactions. His family noticed that he seemed most content when speaking directly with people whose lives had been touched by his example. The approach of his 100th birthday in April created a new wave of celebration planning. The milestone that had originally inspired his garden walks was now being marked by a nation that wanted to honor their beloved knight. The BBC announced plans for a special birthday program, and the Royal Mail was preparing a commemorative stamp featuring his image. Sir Thomas viewed the upcoming celebration with mixed feelings. While he was grateful for the recognition, he worried that too much focus on his personal achievement might overshadow the real purpose of his efforts, supporting healthcare workers and spreading hope during difficult times. "I don't need a big fuss made over an old man's birthday," he told during one of their planning sessions. "But if people want to use the occasion to raise more money for good causes, then I'm happy to participate." The solution came in the form of a virtual birthday celebration that would allow people from around the world to participate while maintaining safety during the ongoing pandemic. The event would feature messages from world leaders, performances by major celebrities, and most importantly, testimonials from healthcare workers who had benefited from the funds his walk had raised. President Joe recorded a special message praising Sir Thomas as a beacon of hope during humanity's darkest hour. Prime Minister Johnson announced that the government would match all donations made during the birthday celebration, potentially doubling the impact of every contribution. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Queen herself sent a personal letter expressing her continued admiration for Sir Thomas and announcing that she would be sending a personalized birthday card, a rare honor reserved for the most exceptional centenarians. As the birthday celebration approached, Sir Thomas spent quiet moments reflecting on the remarkable journey his life had taken. From a young soldier fighting in the jungles of Burma to a knight of the realm inspiring millions around the world, the path had been anything but predictable. He often returned to his garden in the early morning hours, when the media attention was quiet, and he could walk slowly among the flower beds his late wife had planted years earlier. The paved area where he had completed his historic laps seemed to hold a special energy, as if the determination and hope he had invested there continued to radiate outward. During one such morning walk, accompanied by his faithful walking frame, Sir Thomas encountered Mrs., an elderly neighbor who had been too shy to approach during the earlier crowds and celebrations. "Sir Thomas," she said hesitantly, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but what you did, it gave me the courage to start volunteering at the local food bank. I'd been wanting to help but was afraid I was too old to be useful." Sir Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "My dear lady, service has no age limit. The fact that my little walk inspired you to help others, that makes everything worthwhile." Their brief conversation perfectly captured what Sir Thomas valued most about his unexpected fame: the ripple effect of inspiration that encouraged others to contribute to their communities in their own unique ways. He had become a catalyst for countless acts of kindness and service that would continue long after the media attention faded. As he returned to the house that morning, Sir Thomas felt a deep sense of contentment about the path his life had taken. The knighthood ceremony at Windsor Castle felt like both an ending and a beginning, the culmination of his garden walk journey, but also the launch of a new chapter focused on using his platform to encourage service and spread hope. The afternoon brought its usual schedule of interviews and planning meetings, but Sir Thomas approached each commitment with renewed energy. He had found his purpose in these final years of his life, and he intended to make the most of whatever time remained to inspire others and support the causes closest to his heart. The legacy of Sir Thomas More extended far beyond the boundaries of his Bedfordshire garden, weaving itself into the fabric of British culture and inspiring a global movement of compassion that would endure long after the pandemic's end. As autumn arrived in, the knight who had captured the world's heart continued his mission with unwavering determination, despite the increasing frailty that came with his advanced age. His 100th birthday celebration in April had been a triumph beyond anyone's expectations. The virtual event had reached an estimated audience of 50 million people worldwide, raising an additional £8 million for NHS charities. Messages of congratulation had poured in from every continent, with world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens alike sharing how Sir Thomas had influenced their own perspectives on service and resilience. The commemorative postage stamp featuring his image had become one of the fastest-selling releases in Royal Mail history. More significantly, the stamp served as a daily reminder to millions of people that extraordinary achievements could emerge from the simplest acts of service. Every letter posted carried his image, and symbolically, his message of hope to recipients across the nation. Educational institutions had begun incorporating Sir Thomas's story into their curricula, using his journey as a teaching tool for lessons about citizenship, perseverance, and the power of individual action to create positive change. Primary school children wrote essays about what they could do to help their communities, inspired by the example of the centenarian who had transformed his garden into a launching pad for global goodwill. The University of Oxford announced the establishment of the Sir Thomas More Fellowship in Public Service, a program designed to support research into how individual actions could address societal challenges. The fellowship would bring together scholars from around the world to study the sociological and psychological factors that had made Sir Thomas's story so universally compelling. Dr. Elizabeth, the professor selected to lead the fellowship program, explained its significance during the announcement ceremony. Sir Thomas More's achievement represents something profound about human nature, our innate desire to contribute to the greater good, even when facing personal challenges. This fellowship will help us understand how to nurture and amplify that impulse in future generations. The international recognition continued to grow throughout the year. The United Nations invited Sir Thomas to deliver a virtual address to the General Assembly on International Day of Older Persons, making him one of the few private citizens ever accorded such an honor. His speech, delivered from his sitting room with characteristic humility, focused on the importance of intergenerational cooperation and the valuable contributions that older adults could make to society. "Age is not a barrier to service," he told the assembled delegates via video link, his voice steady despite his physical frailty. "Whether you are 9 or 99, you have something valuable to offer your community. The question is not whether you are too old or too young to make a difference. The question is whether you have the courage to try." The speech was simultaneously translated into dozens of languages and broadcast around the world, reaching an estimated audience of over 100 million people. Social media platforms exploded with responses from viewers sharing their own commitments to community service, using the hashtag #NeverTooOld that emerged organically from his remarks. Back home Sir Thomas found his greatest satisfaction in the smaller, more personal interactions that his fame had facilitated. The foundation established in his name had grown into a major charitable organization, but he insisted on maintaining direct involvement in key decisions about fund distribution. One of his most cherished projects was the establishment of Tom's Gardens, therapeutic outdoor spaces at hospitals across Britain designed to provide respite and healing for healthcare workers and patients alike. Each garden featured a small plaque with his favorite phrase, "Tomorrow will be a good day," serving as a permanent reminder of hope for all who visited. The first garden was unveiled at the hospital where Sir Thomas had received treatment years earlier. As he cut the ribbon with shaking hands, surrounded by the medical staff who had cared for him, the emotion of the moment was palpable. Here was a man who had received care and was now ensuring that future patients and caregivers would have access to spaces of beauty and tranquility. Dr. Jennifer, the chief medical officer, spoke at the dedication ceremony with tears in her eyes. "Sir Thomas has taught us that healing involves more than medical procedures. It requires hope, dignity, and spaces where the human spirit can find renewal. These gardens will serve thousands of people in the years to come." The garden project became a model that was replicated internationally. Hospitals in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other Commonwealth countries began creating their own versions of Tom's Gardens, each adapted to local conditions, but unified by the same commitment to providing healing spaces for those dedicated to caring for others. As winter approached, Sir Thomas's health began to decline more noticeably. The family made the difficult decision to reduce his public appearances, though he continued to participate in selected interviews and virtual events from the comfort of his home. Even as his physical strength waned, his spirit remained undiminished, and his commitment to inspiring others never wavered. During what would prove to be his final television interview, Sir Thomas reflected on the unexpected trajectory his life had taken and the lessons he hoped to leave behind. The interviewer, clearly moved by the privilege of speaking with the beloved knight, asked him what he wanted people to remember most about his story. Sir Thomas paused for a long moment, gathering his thoughts with the same deliberation he had shown throughout his remarkable journey. "I hope people remember that every single person has the power to make a difference, regardless of their age or circumstances. My little walk in the garden proved that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they act with love and determination." He continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke from the heart. "The real heroes of this story are not the old soldier who walked up and down his garden. The real heroes are all the people who opened their hearts and their wallets to support our NHS workers. They are the ones who proved that kindness and generosity are the strongest forces in the human experience." The interview concluded with Sir Thomas offering one final message to the millions who had followed his journey. Please remember that every day is an opportunity to help someone else, to spread a little kindness, to make tomorrow a good day for another person. That is the legacy I hope we can all share. As the camera turned off and the film crew packed their equipment, Sir Thomas sat quietly in his favorite chair, surrounded by the photographs and mementos of a life that had touched countless others. The garden outside his window looked peaceful in the fading afternoon light, the same modest space where he had taken his first tentative steps toward immortality just months earlier. The knighthood ceremony at Windsor Castle felt both recent and distant, a pinnacle moment in a life that had been quietly remarkable long before the world took notice. His military service, his devotion to family, his decades of community involvement, all of these had prepared him for the moment when he would be called upon to inspire a nation, and ultimately the world. In the quiet of his sitting room, Sir Thomas More continued to embody the values that had made him beloved across the globe. Humility, service, optimism, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity. These were the true sources of his knighthood, more precious than any ceremony or title. Outside his window, the garden where it all began rested peacefully, forever changed from an ordinary patch of pavement into hallowed ground, where one man's determination had planted seeds of hope that would bloom in hearts around the world for generations to come. Tomorrow would indeed be a good day, thanks to the legacy of the knight who had proven that heroes could emerge from the most unexpected places, at the most unexpected times, to remind us all of the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness.